Hello, everyone. Today I'm going to share an inspiring story about racism and how a black woman, despite being looked down upon and judged based on her appearance, made a luxury car dealership realize the importance of respect and proper awareness. This story is not just about fighting discrimination. It's also about how each one of us can make a difference, whether big or small, in a world full of prejudices. If you've ever encountered a similar situation, or if you've witnessed a significant change after someone dared to stand up against injustice, I would love to hear your story. Please share your experience in the comments below. I'm excited to listen and share more. Together, we can create a stronger community where everyone is treated fairly and with the respect they deserve. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any other inspiring stories. Thank you for joining me today. Tasha Simmons, a confident woman in her early 30s, stepped into a high-end luxury car dealership in Boston on a beautiful Saturday morning. Dressed simply in jeans and a white t-shirt, she looked like just another everyday customer. But she wasn't just any customer. She had a mission. Tasha was there to buy a Rolls Royce Phantom as a surprise gift for her sister Caroline, who had recently defeated breast cancer. After all the struggles her sister had been through, Tasha wanted to gift her something truly special, a luxury car worth $285,000 that Caroline had always dreamed of owning. However, Tasha's attire didn't fit the usual profile of someone who walked into such a luxury dealership. As she entered the showroom, she was met with judgmental stares from the salespeople, who immediately began to size her up based on her appearance. Tasha, being a woman who valued simplicity, didn't mind that people couldn't see beyond her casual look. But that day, the sales team at Boston Luxury Motors made an assumption she wouldn't soon forget. Ethan Marshall, the sales manager at the dealership, immediately sized her up when he saw her. With a sneer, he approached Tasha and said, "I'm sorry, but I think you're in the wrong place. These vehicles start at over $300,000. His tone was condescending, dripping with the implication that someone who looked like her couldn't possibly be interested in such an expensive car. His behavior was not just dismissive, but downright insulting. The other salespeople behind him exchanged snickers, further adding to Tasha's humiliation. Yet she remained calm. Instead of reacting angrily, she simply stated, "I am interested in purchasing the Rolls Royce Phantom." But Ethan wasn't having any of it. "Ma'am, perhaps you should consider a more affordable option," he suggested, pointing to the used car section located in a different part of the dealership. Tasha, not one to be swayed by superficial judgments, asked to see the interior of the Phantom, but Ethan told her that the car was by appointment only. This wasn't true. It was just a lie designed to brush her off and dismiss her request without much effort. Despite the constant discouragement, Tasha persisted in her quiet and polite manner, still determined to see the car she wanted for her sister. She was met with yet another attempt at rejection when Ethan told her that the car wasn't available for viewing, as it was reserved for more serious clients, and that she would need to make an appointment. This treatment felt like a personal insult, but still, Tasha kept her composure. She had been through far worse in her life, having grown up in a world where people often judged her because of her appearance. This was not the first time she had been treated unfairly. As the scene continued to unfold, a well-dressed couple walked into the showroom. Ethan's demeanor immediately changed. His tone became warmer and friendlier as he greeted them with enthusiasm. He ushered them to the exact same Rolls-Royce Phantom that he had refused to show Tasha. Watching the scene from the sidelines, Tasha realized that this wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was racial discrimination. The couple, dressed in expensive clothing, were being treated with respect and offered premium service, while she, in her simple clothes, was treated like an outsider. Though hurt by the treatment, Tasha wasn't about to let this moment define her. Daniel, a young salesman at the dealership who had been quietly observing the exchange, felt uncomfortable. He approached Tasha and offered her an apologetic smile. "I'm sorry about that," he said quietly. He was the only one who had treated her with respect, despite her simple appearance. Tasha thanked Daniel for his kindness, but knew that her experience at the dealership was a stark reminder of how much work there was left to do in terms of changing people's attitudes toward others. As she left the dealership, she couldn't help but think of how many others had been judged the way she had, based purely on their outward appearance, without the opportunity to prove their worth. That night, when Tasha shared her experience with her husband, David Simmons, he was infuriated. David, a self-made billionaire and tech entrepreneur, immediately wanted to take action. He was protective of his wife, but he also saw the larger issue at play. Tasha, however, did not want to act out of anger or frustration. She wanted to handle the situation with grace, but David was determined to make sure the dealership learned a valuable lesson in humility and respect. Little did they know, the next day would bring a dramatic turn of events. The next morning, Tasha and David had already discussed how they wanted to approach the situation. David was prepared to take action, but he understood Tasha's desire for resolution without creating a public spectacle. However, after their conversation, David knew the moment had come to make a powerful statement, not just for Tasha, but for all those who have been unfairly judged based on appearance, race, or background. David knew that standing by and doing nothing wouldn't change the reality of discrimination. Action was needed to bring about awareness and spark a shift in thinking. By the next day, he had come up with a plan, one that would force the dealership to confront its biases and educate its staff on the importance of respect and equality. But he wasn't going to just walk in there to confront them. He had something else in mind, something much more impactful. As Tasha prepared for her day, David was already taking steps to put his plan into motion. The powerful billionaire tech entrepreneur was not just going to let Ethan Marshall, the sales manager who had treated Tasha with such disrespect, off easy. Instead, David had arranged for the Rolls Royce Phantom that Tasha had been interested in to be brought to the dealership the following morning. Not just any Phantom, but a custom-built Rolls Royce Phantom with a unique midnight blue finish that shimmered in the sunlight, valued at over $1.5 million. When the gleaming black Rolls Royce pulled up to Boston Luxury Motors, the staff froze. The car was beyond anything they had ever seen before, and the chauffeur opened the door with a white-gloved precision. Out stepped David Simmons, tall and impeccably dressed, exuding the calm and quiet authority that matched his billionaire status. He stood there for a moment, his presence commanding attention. Without waiting for anyone to speak, he turned and opened the door for Tasha, who had arrived beside him in a modest but elegant outfit. A simple blue dress that was timeless and graceful, contrasting sharply with the flashy appearance of the dealership. David, ever the confident and composed businessman, led Tasha into the showroom, where the staff was visibly stunned. Their faces dropped when they realized who had just entered the dealership. Ethan Marshall, the sales manager who had been the one to humiliate Tasha the previous day, quickly straightened his tie and tried to recover his composure, but his usual charm was nowhere to be found. David took in the stunned faces of the employees and addressed them with calm authority. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding here. My wife came to this dealership yesterday, interested in purchasing a car, but she was met with disrespect," David said, his voice steady but piercing. "That's not acceptable to me, and it should not be acceptable to anyone." Ethan stammered, his previous arrogance completely wiped away. I didn't know, Mr. Simmons. I didn't realize she was your wife. If I had known," he trailed off, but his words were useless at this point. David continued, not allowing Ethan to avoid responsibility. "You should treat every customer with respect, not just the ones you assume can afford the cars," David said, his voice growing firmer. He turned to Richard Mason, the owner of the dealership, who had stepped forward, now realizing the gravity of the situation. Richard tried to recover, his usual cordiality slipping away as he realized the full extent of what had happened. "I'm very sorry, Mr. Simmons," Richard began, his voice nervous. "This is certainly not the kind of experience we want to provide our clients. We value every customer, regardless of appearance. But I'm afraid we've made an unfortunate mistake." David didn't look at him. Instead, he turned to Ethan and said, "I'm not here to get an apology. I'm here to make sure this doesn't happen again." The dealership staff, including Ethan, were now on edge, knowing that this wasn't just a matter of a single insult, but of a much larger issue, the inherent biases they had let fester in their workplace. David then looked at Tasha, who had been quiet until now. Tasha didn't need to say much. She wasn't there to fight or argue. She simply wanted people to understand the damage done by assumptions. She wanted them to know that worth is never determined by appearances, by how much you wear, how you speak, or what car you drive. David turned to Richard Mason and suggested, the dealership should make things right, starting with training for all staff on unconscious bias. You might want to consider implementing a program that teaches your salespeople not just about how to sell cars, but how to treat every person who walks through your doors with respect. And it should be a mandatory part of employee onboarding. Richard, sensing his business might be on the line, agreed. Absolutely, Mr. Simmons. That's a fair request. I'll make sure it happens. We will bring in consultants to help with training. David turned to the young salesman who had shown respect to Tasha, Daniel. I'd like you to handle the paperwork for my wife's purchase, David said. You've been the only one who treated her with respect, and I think you've earned this opportunity. Daniel's eyes widened, and he looked at Tasha and David, his face filled with genuine gratitude. Thank you, sir, he said quietly. I'm honored. David nodded. I'm glad to see someone here understands the value of respect. He then looked at Ethan, who stood motionless, clearly realizing the consequences of his earlier actions. Maybe you'll learn a thing or two from this experience, David added, his words deliberate and sharp. The showroom fell silent, and all eyes were on David Simmons and Tasha as they left the dealership, their new Rolls Royce Phantom now confirmed as a purchase. As David and Tasha drove away, Tasha smiled softly, not because she had proven her worth, she had never needed to, but because she had helped open the eyes of those who had closed themselves off from the truth. Every person deserves respect. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity at Boston Luxury Motors. The dealership, still reeling from the shocking confrontation with David Simmons and the humiliation of their staff, found themselves faced with an uncomfortable truth. They had failed to respect their customers, especially those they perceived as not fitting their idea of a luxury car buyer. David Simmons, despite his wealth and status, didn't want a dramatic show of power or a public spectacle. What he wanted was real, lasting change. After the confrontation at the dealership, Richard Mason, the owner of the dealership, spent several sleepless nights reflecting on the events that had unfolded. He couldn't shake the uncomfortable reality that his business, one that prided itself on offering exclusive, high-end cars to the wealthy, had let prejudices and assumptions infiltrate their culture and affect how they treated people, especially customers like Tasha Simmons, who had proven that wealth and value aren't determined by appearance. David's suggestion to bring in consultants to train the staff on unconscious bias was not just a suggestion. It was a necessity if the dealership wanted to avoid further damage to its reputation and avoid alienating customers. It was clear that the dealership's sales approach needed a complete overhaul, and Richard was now determined to do whatever it took to make things right. As part of the agreement that had been discussed the day before, the dealership began preparations to implement a training program on unconscious bias. The consultants would come in, assess the staff's current attitudes and behavior, and provide workshops on how to engage with every customer respectfully and without judgment, no matter their appearance, race, or financial background. The dealership would not just change its approach to selling cars. They would be reshaping their corporate culture to ensure that everyone who entered their showroom felt valued, regardless of their background or how they were dressed. The first day of training arrived quickly. A group of specialized consultants, including behavioral psychologists and experts in diversity and inclusion, gathered in the showroom to begin their sessions. The staff was told up front that this training was mandatory. Every single employee, from the salespeople to the service workers, would participate. There was no room for exceptions. It was a bold move by Richard Mason, but he understood that if his business was going to survive, it had to evolve. As the sessions began, the mood in the showroom was a far cry from the usual polished professionalism that had characterized the dealership. The employees, particularly Ethan Marshall, the sales manager who had disrespected Tasha, were visibly uncomfortable. The first exercise was designed to highlight the implicit biases people carry with them. The room was divided into small groups, and each group was asked to role-play various customer scenarios. One group played the part of a wealthy, well-dressed client, while the other group portrayed a casual customer, someone dressed simply but still interested in purchasing an expensive luxury car. Ethan was assigned to role-play the sales manager, dealing with the well-dressed client. He confidently ran through the pitch, using all the polished words and gestures he had mastered over the years. But when it came time for him to interact with the casual customer, the kind he had turned away the day before, he struggled. His words faltered, his body language was stiff, and his tone was dismissive. The contrast was glaring, and he immediately realized how easy it was for him to unconsciously show bias based on appearance. As the exercise concluded, the consultant leading the session paused and addressed the group. What you've just experienced is a form of unconscious bias. These biases often influence how we treat others, even when we don't mean to, and in customer service, that can be disastrous. The room fell silent. Ethan's face turned a deep shade of red. He had just seen for himself how his actions had reflected a bias he hadn't even realized he had. Richard Mason, who had been watching the session unfold, was visibly shaken. He didn't want to admit it, but he had allowed this kind of bias to fester in his dealership for far too long. It wasn't just Ethan, it was everyone, from the junior salespeople to the senior managers. They all had assumptions about who was worthy of their time and attention. Later in the day, a second session focused on customer engagement and how to create a welcoming environment for every customer. The consultants walked the employees through the importance of empathy, asking them to consider not only the financial potential of each customer, but also their human dignity. This was a key turning point for many of the employees. Daniel, the young salesman who had shown respect to Tasha, spoke up during this session. I've always tried to treat everyone the same, but it's not always easy when the company culture doesn't support it. I've realized now that I was more aware of treating people equally than some of the others here. David had asked Tasha to attend the session in an unofficial capacity. She wasn't there to confront the staff, but to share her perspective on how important it was to look beyond appearances and to see every person as worthy of respect. When she spoke, her words carried the weight of someone who had been both a victim of prejudice and a person who had risen above it. She shared how she had experienced discrimination throughout her life, but also how she had learned to stand tall despite it. The way you treat people, Tasha said, reflects your character, not theirs. By the end of the day, the staff was exhausted but deeply moved. They had learned valuable lessons about empathy, understanding, and the destructive nature of bias. Ethan, now fully aware of his mistakes, sought out Tasha before the session ended. With sincere humility, he approached her and apologized. I didn't realize how wrong I was. I'll never make that mistake again, he said. Tasha smiled softly. Thank you, she replied. It's not about me. It's about all of us learning and growing. The next day, the dealership began to implement the changes. The unconscious bias training became a permanent part of the onboarding process for new employees, and the entire team was expected to continually engage in self-reflection about their biases. The dealership's new approach focused on creating a welcoming environment where everyone, regardless of their appearance, would feel valued. Over the next few weeks, things slowly began to change. Customers who had once been turned away based on how they looked now felt seen, heard, and respected. The sales team began to listen more intently, engage more openly, and treat every individual with the respect they deserved. For Richard Mason, the changes brought growth and renewed trust. He was proud of his business, and for the first time, he saw it not just as a place to sell luxury cars, but as a place where every customer, no matter their appearance, was treated with dignity. Ethan, once the sales manager who was quick to judge, was now one of the dealership's most vocal advocates for inclusive customer service. Tasha and David Simmons had sparked a transformation, not just in the dealership, but in the way people saw each other. It wasn't just about the luxury cars anymore. It was about the luxury of respect. As David and Tasha drove away from the dealership in their new car, they both knew that real change was happening. They hadn't just bought a car, they had ignited a movement that would continue to inspire others to look beyond appearances and truly see the person in front of them. The transformation at Boston Luxury Motors wasn't a quick fix. It wasn't about making a single gesture of goodwill and moving on. Instead, it was about changing a deeply ingrained culture, one that had been built on assumptions and biases. The training, while important, was just the beginning. The ripple effect of Tasha and David Simmons' actions continued to spread far beyond the showroom floor, reaching other businesses, employees, and even the larger luxury car industry as a whole. The consequences of their decision to stand up against discrimination were far-reaching and would change the dealership, and possibly an entire sector forever. For Richard Mason, the owner of the dealership, the decision to implement unconscious bias training and to focus on inclusive customer service wasn't just about saving face. It was a genuine attempt to right the wrongs that had been exposed. After the initial training, he personally took the time to meet with each member of his staff to ensure they fully understood the importance of the changes. He wanted to make sure the lessons were internalized, not just checked off as completed tasks. Richard made it a point to engage his employees regularly, holding monthly meetings to check in on their progress. He encouraged them to share their experiences and challenges in putting these changes into practice. He also offered additional training opportunities, ensuring the dealership staff remained up to date on best practices for customer engagement and understanding different forms of unconscious bias. It wasn't long before Richard began to see the results. Customer satisfaction began to increase steadily, and word spread quickly. Former customers who had once walked out of the showroom feeling unnoticed or rejected now returned, pleased to find that the dealership had changed its tune. Tasha and David Simmons had effectively opened their eyes to the realities of prejudice, and their intervention had forced everyone at Boston Luxury Motors to confront their biases head-on. As the days passed, Ethan Marshall, the sales manager who had been the primary figure in Tasha's humiliation, found himself going through a major transformation. At first, he had resented being called out in front of his colleagues. He felt embarrassed and defensive. But as the training sessions progressed, something shifted within him. Ethan began to realize that his arrogance, his sense of superiority, and his prejudices weren't just about making sales. They were about how he viewed the world. He had been quick to judge Tasha and dismiss her, assuming that her simple attire meant she didn't belong in a luxury car showroom. But after spending time with Daniel, the young salesman who had treated Tasha with respect, Ethan began to see things differently. Daniel's approach was a revelation to him. Daniel treated every customer the same, whether they were in a three-piece suit or a t-shirt, with the same genuine interest and respect. Ethan realized that treating people well wasn't just the right thing to do. It also made for better business. People appreciated authentic service, and those who were treated with dignity were more likely to return. They felt valued and seen, not just like another potential sale. Over the weeks, Ethan began to make a concerted effort to change his behavior. He sought out Daniel's advice and began to implement a more inclusive approach when engaging with customers. By the time he met Tasha again at the Collins Foundation Gala, his attitude had completely shifted. He approached her with humility and sincerity. "I owe you an apology," Ethan said, looking her in the eye. "I treated you terribly that day, and I've spent a lot of time reflecting on how wrong I was. I've learned that worth is not determined by what someone wears or how they look. It's about how we treat each other." Tasha, still a bit cautious, smiled softly and replied, "It's not about me, Ethan. It's about everyone. You did the right thing by learning from your mistakes." Now that's true growth. This moment was a turning point not only for Ethan, but for the entire dealership. Ethan's apology wasn't just an act of humility. It was a symbol of the larger shift that was happening within Boston Luxury Motors. By addressing his mistake and taking responsibility, he was modeling the values of respect and self-awareness that the dealership was now striving to instill. The Collins Foundation Gala, a lesson in humility. The night of the Collins Foundation Gala was a turning point for Blake Thompson, the sales manager who had humiliated Tasha so publicly. He had been assigned to volunteer at the event, which he initially saw as a professional obligation, something he had to do to keep his job. He wasn't interested in the charity or its cause. He just wanted to get through the night. But as the evening wore on, something inside him began to change. As he helped with setting up the event and interacted with children and their families, Blake began to see life from a different perspective. He witnessed the struggles and challenges these children faced every day, and yet they carried themselves with an incredible sense of dignity and joy. He realized how much he had taken for granted, how easy it was for him to look down on others based on their appearance, how he had believed that wealth and prestige were the markers of a person's worth. But the real turning point came when Blake met Thomas, a young boy in a wheelchair who was passionate about adaptive sports. Blake had to help him set up for a basketball game, a sport Thomas had mastered despite his physical limitations. The two spoke about the game, and Thomas gave Blake advice on his shooting form. What struck Blake was how genuine and down-to-earth Thomas was. For the first time in a long time, Blake felt a sense of humility. Later that night, Blake found himself in a conversation with Maggie Collins. As they spoke about the foundation's work, Blake realized that Maggie, despite her vast wealth and influence, was one of the most humble people he had ever met. She wasn't flaunting her success. She was focused on making a real difference in the world. "I have learned so much from this experience," Blake admitted, "not just about adaptive sports, but about how important it is to treat people with respect, regardless of their appearance or socioeconomic status." Maggie smiled, understanding the significance of his words. "That's the first step, Blake. You've learned that true value is not about the clothes you wear, the car you drive, or the job you have. It's about how you treat others." That night marked a new chapter in Blake's life. He knew that he would never go back to his old ways. His experience at the Collins Foundation Gala had changed him forever. He now understood that there was more to life than status and appearances. He was determined to carry this lesson with him for the rest of his life. The impact of Tasha and David's actions wasn't confined to Boston Luxury Motors. As more people heard about the training program and the unapologetic stance David and Tasha had taken against bias, other businesses in the area began to follow suit. David's efforts didn't just transform the dealership. They sparked a movement that began to shift societal attitudes in subtle but powerful ways. The lessons learned at Boston Luxury Motors began to echo in local restaurants, retail shops, and offices. People began to challenge their own assumptions about others, whether based on clothing, race, or socioeconomic status, and businesses started to create training programs to address unconscious biases within their workplaces. David and Tasha had sparked more than just a change in how a dealership treated its customers. They had ignited a broader conversation about respect, equality, and human dignity. A conversation that was beginning to resonate with people from all walks of life. By the time Blake and Ethan had undergone their transformations, the community had started to recognize a simple truth. True value is not defined by appearance, but by how people treat each other, regardless of their differences. As the weeks passed, the ripple effect of Tasha and David Simmons's stand against discrimination continued to grow, spreading through the dealership, the community, and even the luxury car industry itself. But while the changes at Boston Luxury Motors were significant, the broader societal implications of those changes were far from over. The transformation that started with a single incident of prejudice had grown into a powerful reminder that real wealth isn't measured in dollars or possessions. It's measured in respect, empathy, and the value we place on people, regardless of how they appear. As Blake's transformation continued, he recognized a key figure in the dealership's success: Daniel, the young salesman who had stood up for Tasha from the very beginning. Daniel had been the only one who saw the potential in treating every customer with respect, regardless of how they looked. He never judged customers based on their attire or how much money they seemed to have. Daniel had grown up in a modest household and understood that wealth wasn't about flashy cars or designer clothes. It was about the integrity and character of the individual. Daniel had been mentoring some of the newer salespeople in the dealership, teaching them not just about the cars they were selling, but about the importance of seeing beyond appearances. His gentle approach was the opposite of Blake's old ways. Daniel's ability to empathize with every customer and to treat them as equals, regardless of background, quickly gained him the respect of his colleagues and customers alike. In fact, when Daniel had been chosen by Alexander Collins to handle the paperwork for the Azure Coupe purchase, it was clear that Daniel's mentorship and the guidance he had received from Tasha had shaped him into an exemplary professional. Alexander had watched the way Daniel treated Tasha with dignity during the entire car buying process, never once making assumptions about her financial status, and it was Daniel who was selected to ensure the proper handling of the sale. This wasn't just because of his technical knowledge. It was because Daniel had become a symbol of the change that was happening at Boston Luxury Motors. As the dealership began to see a consistent increase in customer satisfaction and retention, Daniel became a mentor to new hires, spreading the values of empathy and respect throughout the team. His approach was simple yet powerful. Every customer deserved the same level of attention and care, whether they were buying a luxury sports car or just browsing for fun. The positive changes that had taken root at Boston Luxury Motors quickly spread to the broader community. The dealership, once known for its elitism and discriminatory practices, was now becoming a beacon of change. The story of Tasha Simmons and her ability to turn the tables on a discriminatory system had sparked conversations about race, class, and appearance in many different circles. It wasn't just in the car dealership that change was taking place. Other businesses and service industries in the area began to adopt inclusive policies. Restaurants, retail shops, and even local offices began introducing bias training for their employees. The ripple effect was undeniable. Tasha's story had illuminated how deeply rooted biases were in everyday interactions and how easy it was to assume someone's worth based on their appearance alone. For Tasha and David Simmons, the transformation at the dealership was the start of something bigger. They became active voices in advocating for inclusivity, diversity, and equality in the business world. They supported initiatives aimed at teaching businesses how to be more inclusive and non-discriminatory, helping to spread the lessons learned at Boston Luxury Motors to other industries. As the months passed, Tasha reflected on the experience that had started it all. She realized that the incident at the dealership had not been just about her. It was about challenging assumptions and standing up for what's right. It was about showing people that judging others by their outward appearance wasn't just wrong, it was short-sighted. The world was full of untapped potential, and people often missed out on that potential because they couldn't see beyond a simple exterior. For Blake, Richard Mason, and the rest of the staff at Boston Luxury Motors, the lesson was clear. True wealth isn't about money, it's about how we treat each other. The values of respect, humility, and understanding had transformed their business, and the ripple effect of that transformation continued to inspire others. As Tasha and David Simmons drove away in their new car that day, they knew that their stand against discrimination had sparked real change, not just in one dealership, but in an entire community. The road ahead wasn't without its challenges, but they were ready for it. They had learned and taught others that the world was made richer when people recognized each other as equals, no matter their background, appearance, or financial status. As Boston Luxury Motors continued to evolve, the ripple effect spread far beyond the dealership walls. The community took notice of the changes, and many local businesses began to take a closer look at their own practices. It wasn't just about selling a product, it was about how businesses treated people. Tasha and David Simmons became outspoken advocates for inclusivity, not just in business, but in all aspects of life. They used their platform to speak out against discrimination and prejudice, urging others to take responsibility for their actions and to consider how their behavior affected those around them. Tasha also began working closely with Blake to help other businesses understand the value of human connection. She shared her story at local seminars and workshops, showing companies how they could cultivate more respectful and inclusive environments. Tasha wasn't interested in revenge or punishment. She wanted awareness and change was happening slowly but surely. The Collins Foundation became a leading voice in advocating for diversity and inclusion in various industries. With their combined efforts, they brought awareness to issues of prejudice and discrimination, encouraging businesses everywhere to reevaluate their approach to customer service and employee treatment. As time went on, Blake's transformation became a source of inspiration for others. He was no longer the man who judged others based on their wealth or appearance. Instead, Blake was a champion of respect and understanding. He began mentoring other sales managers in the industry, teaching them the importance of empathy and customer care. He spoke at conferences, sharing the lessons he had learned and encouraging other dealerships to adopt similar practices. For Daniel, the young salesman who had stood up for Tasha, life at Boston Luxury Motors had changed too. He was promoted to sales manager, a position he had never thought possible. But it wasn't just the promotion that excited him. It was the fact that he was now in a position to help create a positive environment for everyone who walked through the dealership doors. The journey of change at Boston Luxury Motors was far from over. The dealership had a long way to go before it could fully undo the damage done by years of discrimination, but the steps taken so far had already made a significant impact. Tasha and David Simmons had ignited a fire, But it was Blake, Daniel, and the entire dealership team who would continue to fuel that fire, ensuring it would burn brightly for years to come. As the dealership grew, so did the lessons learned from the incident with Tasha. In the end, it wasn't just about selling luxury cars, it was about selling respect, equality, and the understanding that true wealth is found in how we treat one another, not in the cars we drive or the clothes we wear. Boston Luxury Motors wasn't just a place to buy a car, it was a place where customers were seen, valued, and treated like family. And for Tasha Simmons, the journey had only just begun. The road ahead was filled with opportunities to continue her work, not just for equality, but for a future where everyone could live without fear of judgment based on appearance, background, or financial status. Tasha's fight was far from over, but it was one she would continue to face with the strength and dignity she had shown from the beginning. The transformation at Boston Luxury Motors didn't just change the way the dealership conducted business. It sparked a revolution in how businesses interacted with their communities and treated their customers. What had started as a humiliating experience for Tasha Simmons turned into a movement, a powerful lesson about inclusivity and the dangers of judging people by appearances. It was an experience that would forever change the lives of those involved, not only within the dealership but across the wider community. As the days turned into weeks, Blake Thompson continued his journey of redemption. No longer the arrogant, dismissive sales manager, Blake had taken full responsibility for his actions. He began to truly see the damage his biased assumptions had caused, not just to Tasha, but to the reputation of the dealership and the broader community. For the first time in his career, he understood that his job wasn't just about making sales. It was about creating authentic relationships with customers, regardless of their appearance or status. Blake made it a point to apologize to everyone who had witnessed his behavior that day, not just to Tasha, but also to the staff, customers, and the other salespeople he had influenced with his old mindset. He had made mistakes, but Blake was determined to use those mistakes as stepping stones toward becoming a better person and professional. One afternoon, after months of personal reflection and hard work, Blake stood before the sales team, his voice steady and full of sincerity. "I owe each of you an apology," he began, his eyes scanning the room, making sure to meet each person's gaze. "I've let prejudice and assumptions cloud my judgment, but I've learned something important. Every customer deserves respect, no matter their clothes, their background, or their financial standing. And I'll do everything in my power to make sure that no one here ever feels the way I made Tasha feel." It wasn't a speech for show, it was a moment of true accountability. Blake knew that earning back the trust of his colleagues would take time, but he was willing to put in the effort. The sales team, including Daniel, the young salesman who had supported Tasha, were moved by Blake's words. There was a noticeable shift in the dealership's atmosphere. People began to work together with renewed purpose, focused not just on selling cars, but on providing the best possible experience for every customer who walked through the door. Under Blake's new leadership, Boston Luxury Motors underwent a radical transformation. The first change was to implement mandatory unconscious bias training for every single employee, from the sales team to the managers and even the janitorial staff. The training wasn't just a one-off workshop, it was part of a broader initiative to reshape the company culture. It included role-playing exercises, discussions on empathy, and real-life scenarios where employees could practice seeing beyond appearances. In addition to the training, the dealership took steps to rebuild its image within the community. They started by sponsoring local events, charities, and organizations that help those in need. They didn't just want to sell luxury cars, they wanted to show that they were committed to improving the lives of the people who lived in the area. The Collins Foundation played a large role in helping the dealership find its footing. Maggie and Alexander Collins worked closely with Richard Mason, the dealership's owner, and Blake to develop programs and initiatives that promoted inclusivity in every area of their business. One of the most impactful changes was a new customer service policy that ensured every potential customer, no matter their background, was given a warm welcome and the same level of attention. The dealership also began hosting monthly community outreach events, inviting people from all walks of life to visit, engage, and learn more about the luxury cars they offered. These events were free to attend, and everyone was treated with respect. It was a way for the dealership to democratize luxury, showing that luxury wasn't just for the elite, it was for anyone who appreciated quality and craftsmanship, regardless of their financial status. The changes at Boston Luxury Motors were just the beginning. The lessons learned from Tasha and David Simmons' confrontation with Blake Thompson and the dealership's management began to ripple through other industries. The power of Tasha's calm resilience and Blake's redemption set off a chain reaction that went beyond just one dealership or one event. While the events at Boston Luxury Motors had been a pivotal moment, it wasn't the end of Tasha and David Simmons' journey. The couple continued to be a powerful voice for change, using their influence to encourage businesses to reconsider how they interacted with customers, particularly when it came to prejudices based on appearance. They started to host community outreach programs and workshops for business leaders, teaching them how to approach people with empathy and treat every individual with respect. Tasha's story became more than just a personal experience. It became a platform for education. As an advocate for inclusivity and diversity, she used her voice to encourage organizations to create environments that didn't just accept diversity, but celebrated it. Tasha's goal was never about revenge. It was about creating awareness. And as she continued her advocacy, more and more businesses began to take note. Inclusive leadership was no longer just a buzzword. It became a necessity. Tasha and David's work reached far beyond the luxury car industry. They partnered with nonprofits and educational institutions to ensure that young professionals entering the workforce were equipped to handle issues of diversity, equality, and fairness. They also supported initiatives that focused on economic empowerment for underrepresented groups, encouraging businesses to invest in talent from all backgrounds. The changes at Boston Luxury Motors did not go unnoticed in the luxury car industry. Blake's transformation and the impact of Tasha's advocacy began to inspire a broader conversation within the sector. More luxury dealerships started to implement bias training and focused on building stronger, more inclusive relationships with customers. The story of Tasha Simmons, a woman who had the means to buy a luxury car but was treated poorly because of her appearance, began to echo throughout the industry. Many luxury car dealerships realized they had been catering only to an elite clientele, assuming that wealth was a sign of worthiness. The idea that appearance could define someone's value was being increasingly challenged. Industry leaders began to open their eyes to the damage done by their own biases. A significant shift began to take place, not just in the way salespeople interacted with potential buyers, but in the way the luxury car market was structured. Sales managers and staff were now tasked with connecting with customers on a deeper level, asking the right questions, and getting to know them as people rather than making assumptions based on clothing, car models, or the way someone looked. For Blake Thompson, this wasn't just about personal redemption. It was a journey toward growth and development. His past behavior, now seen for what it truly was, weighed heavily on him. While the changes at the dealership were a start, Blake knew that his work wasn't done. He felt a sense of responsibility, not only to himself but to the sales team he led. The sales environment at Boston Luxury Motors had drastically shifted, and he now took an active role in making sure that everyone from the youngest salesperson to the most senior managers understood the importance of empathy in their roles. Blake also realized that while he could change the atmosphere within the dealership, he had the power to inspire change within the luxury car industry as a whole. As his reputation improved, Blake was invited to industry conferences where he shared his story. He spoke about the mistakes he made, the lessons learned, and how the luxury car industry could become more inclusive and accessible to everyone, not just the wealthy elite. It was a tough road for Blake. In many ways, the industry was resistant to change. For years, they had operated under the assumption that their target customers were a narrow, homogeneous group. But Blake didn't give up. He made it his mission to prove that embracing diversity wasn't just about doing the right thing. It was also a business strategy that could expand their reach and make them more successful in the long run. As time passed, Tasha's legacy grew beyond the luxury car dealership. Her work to change the way people interacted with each other, particularly in business settings, touched many lives. She had shown that it was possible to transform a toxic environment through patience, determination, and a belief in the power of change. For Boston Luxury Motors, the lessons learned were lasting. The dealership's commitment to diversity and inclusion became a central part of their identity. They didn't just see it as a way to make sales. They saw it as a way to build relationships with the community and make a real difference. Tasha's experience with Blake Thompson had planted the seeds of change, and those seeds grew into a flourishing garden of respect, empathy, and understanding. In the end, the lessons learned at Boston Luxury Motors reached far beyond the car showroom. It inspired a transformation in the way people viewed wealth, status, and worth. And that transformation would continue to inspire businesses and individuals to look beyond the surface, to see the humanity in each other, and to understand that true wealth is measured by how we treat others, not by the labels we place on them. One of the key lessons from this story is the importance of respecting others, regardless of their appearance, wealth, or social status. In life, we often encounter people who are judged based on how they dress or carry themselves. However, the story of Tasha and Blake shows us that a person's true value is not defined by external factors, but by their character, genuineness, and how they treat others. For older adults, a critical message here is never to let others define your worth based on how you look or what you have. In today's world, there are people who still hold prejudices and biases about appearance or age. But we must remember that each person has their own unique story, efforts, and contributions that deserve respect. No one has the right to diminish your worth just because they don't understand the experiences you've lived through. By changing our mindset and actions, we can all contribute to creating a fairer society where every individual is treated with respect and judged by their actions, not by superficial perceptions. When we place ourselves in others' shoes, we realize that empathy and respect lead to positive outcomes and create a stronger community where everyone is heard and valued. Respecting others, no matter their outward appearance, is key to fostering a supportive and inclusive environment for all.